The chamber fell silent as Queen Sarith entered, her obsidian exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh lights of the grand diplomatic hall. Nearly 3 meters tall, her sheer presence sent a wave of tension through the room. A queen who had conquered 14 star systems with her razor-sharp talons and unmatched battle prowess, Sarith was a living legend of the Karathi Empire. The other ambassadors, normally unflinching in their postures, instinctively stepped back. Even the mighty Calvarians and Thraxians, themselves formidable warriors, seemed to shrink in her presence. Only one being in the room remained utterly still. Dr. Ara Voss, a human expert on juvenile development, sat at the table with her hands folded in front of her, meeting Sarith's 6 amber eyes without flinching. She was small by human standards, not even half the size of the towering queen. Her weathered hands were calm, betraying none of the fear the other diplomats displayed. The tension between them was palpable, but Ara remained unshaken. She'd faced far worse than this. She had come from a species that had barely reached the stars, one whose survival had depended on ingenuity, resilience, and, above all, compassion. "You're the human they sent," Sarith's voice, translated through a neural implant, sounded like grinding stone. "I find this improbable." Ara's lips barely twitched. "You're welcome to your doubts, Your Majesty," she replied evenly, her voice calm but firm. "Though I wonder why you'd travel 3 systems to meet someone whose expertise you question." A ripple of shock passed through the room. The other ambassadors edged closer to the exits, as though prepared to flee at any moment. The queen's mandibles clicked, a sound that had heralded the end for countless warriors. Yet, in the silence that followed, Ara did not flinch. Sarith narrowed her eyes, a shift in her posture, signaling a moment of pause. "You do not fear me," she said, her voice betraying a touch of curiosity. "I respect you, Your Majesty," Ara responded, her gaze unwavering. "There's a difference." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. The ambassadors exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something far more dangerous than politics was at play here. Then, without warning, the chamber doors burst open. Ara didn't flinch. In tumbled 3 Kirathi cubs, unsteady on their limbs, their exoskeletons still soft and forming. The sight of them, wild and uncoordinated, seemed almost childlike compared to the dominating figure of their mother, the largest, with a distinctive silver marking across her carapace, froze at the sight of the gathered diplomats. Her siblings, equally clumsy, crashed into her, creating a tangle of limbs and chirps. But then, the silver-marked cub's eyes locked onto Ara, and the room fell still. The translation device struggled to interpret the cub's sounds, but the joy was unmistakable. What happened next would become the topic of debate for decades to come. The cub hesitated for only a moment, her wide amber eyes fixed on Ara, before she darted forward, her siblings hot on her heels. The air in the chamber thickened with tension as the predators, the most feared species in the galaxy, seemed to lose all control in the presence of the small human. The cubs, despite their predatory nature, were nothing more than playful youths, their underdeveloped exoskeletons still soft and malleable, their limbs uncoordinated in the way of all young creatures. Yet, their determination was absolute. They were drawn to Ara, as if they had known her all their lives. The other ambassadors gasped, eyes wide, unsure of how to react. Instinctively, they edged back, fearing that the cubs would lash out in a flash of claws and teeth. They had never seen a creature this young, this untrained, act with such trust, especially not towards a human. Queen Sarith stepped forward, her massive form casting a shadow over the diplomats, her razor-sharp talons clicking menacingly against the stone floor. Every inch of her body radiated the kind of authority that could crush entire civilizations. The room seemed to contract around her as she made her way toward Ara, her combat stance defensive and protective. Yet, Ara, undeterred, stood slowly, her arms open in a universal gesture of peace. She didn't retreat. She didn't flinch. She simply waited. The sight was jarring. A human, barely more than a child in comparison, standing before the most powerful predator in the galaxy, arms outstretched. The cubs didn't hesitate. The silver-marked one, Tira, was the first to reach her. She crashed into Ara with surprising force, her tiny body sending a Z tumbling, but the human barely wavered. Ara laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that rang out through the sterile chamber, an echo of something so alien and yet so human. "Easy there, Tira," Ara said, gently disentangling herself from the cub's enthusiastic grip. The other cubs followed suit, climbing over her with sharp talons carefully retracted, their chirps a chorus of innocent joy. The ambassadors stared in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. These were creatures that had been raised to view humans as beneath them, scavengers at best, expendable at worst. Yet, here they were, these terrifying apex predators, bonding with the human as if she were one of their own. Ara's calm was unwavering. She knelt down, speaking softly to each cub in turn, her voice carrying the steady, soothing cadence of someone who had spent years working with all manner of young creatures. She didn't force them into anything. She simply showed them respect, understanding their needs and their fears, and they responded. The silver-marked cub nuzzled Ara's leg, her sharp claws retracting as she settled into the human's warmth. The moment was almost peaceful, until the murmurs in the chamber began. Ara looked up at the towering figure of Queen Sarith, her voice steady but laced with something deeper. "Your Majesty," Ara said, her eyes never leaving the Queen's. "Perhaps we should have this conversation somewhere more comfortable." For a long moment, Queen Sarith remained still, her eyes flicking from Ara to the cubs and back again. Then, without warning, the Queen froze. Her posture softened, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough to send shockwaves through the room. Queen Sarith stood motionless, her towering presence now seeming less imposing, as she watched her cubs, her very flesh and blood, show an uncharacteristic trust in the human before her. The cubs, once unflinching in their loyalty to their own kind, had voluntarily chosen to approach Ara, an outsider. This was unheard of in Karathi culture. Cubs of their species were fiercely territorial, trained from birth to bond only with those of their own bloodline. The chamber was filled with hushed whispers as the ambassadors and attendants exchanged confused looks, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The Kirathi Empire, with its millennia of dominance, had never known a scenario like this. The very idea that their most formidable young were drawn to a human, an outsider, seemed to shake the foundations of everything they knew. Ara stood there, surrounded by the cubs, her expression calm. She was not afraid. She was not intimidated by the grandeur of Queen Sarith or the intimidating silence of the Kirathi. Instead, she was focused entirely on the cubs, treating them with kindness, listening to their soft chirps, and guiding them gently as they nestled around her. She wasn't forcing anything. She was simply being present in a way that seemed to speak to the very heart of these creatures. Sarith took a step forward, her massive frame dwarfing Ara. Her amber eyes narrowed, calculating. You speak of kindness. The queen's voice cut through the tension. But I have seen your kind. You conquer with deceit, with promises you do not keep. You are not predators. You are scavengers, taking what you do not deserve. Ara didn't flinch. She simply met Sarith's gaze and spoke evenly. Kindness doesn't require domination, Your Majesty. It requires respect. We don't have to conquer each other to coexist. The queen's mandibles clicked, a sharp, unsettling sound that made the others in the room shift uncomfortably. Yet, despite the sound's threatening nature, there was something different in her eyes. Something almost uncertain. Respect, Sarith repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. You think we should teach our cubs to trust strangers? Ara's voice was soft but firm. Trust isn't built through fear, Your Majesty. It's built through understanding. Your cubs are scared. They're trying to make sense of a world that doesn't make sense to them. And sometimes all they need is someone to show them they're not alone. Sarith stood silent for a moment, her gaze flickering between Ara and her cubs. It was clear she was struggling to reconcile the evidence before her with everything she had known to be true. She had spent her life ruling through strength, fear, and dominance. Yet, here was a human, a small, fragile creature who had done what the greatest Kirathi warriors could never accomplish. She had gained the trust of the cubs without a single threat, without an ounce of force. The queen's thoughts were interrupted as Tira, the silver-marked cub, looked up at Ara, then back at Sarith. The cub's eyes locked with her mother's for a long, silent moment, as if asking for permission. No, seeking validation. For the first time in many centuries, Sarith found herself uncertain. And in that uncertainty, a new thought began to form. Something terrifying, something that could change everything. What if this human, with her strange methods, had something the Kirathi had overlooked for generations? The tension in the room thickened, each second stretching longer than the last. Queen Sarith remained still, her massive frame casting an imposing shadow over Ara, who was kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the cubs. The sight of the Kirathi queen, so powerful and dominant, paralyzed in indecision, was unprecedented. Sarith was a ruler, a conqueror, a being whose mere presence had ended wars. Yet here she was, watching as her offspring, her pride, clung to a human as though she were their own. A weakness, a threat, a possibility. The room, too, felt different now. It was as if the very air had changed, and every ambassador in the chamber, once so confident in their superiority, now seemed unsure, tentative. The Calvarians exchanged glances, murmuring softly. The Thraxians, known for their calculating minds, were watching this interaction with both curiosity and apprehension. The Kurthi queen, who had ruled her people through sheer will and ferocity, was now questioning the very foundation of her empire. You think we should raise our young like this? Sarith finally spoke, her voice low and almost contemplative. She had shifted from pure aggression to something softer, something almost vulnerable. You think kindness, something so alien to us, can replace the strength we have built for millennia? Ara stood up slowly, brushing off the cubs that had crawled onto her shoulders, and met Sarith's gaze without hesitation. I don't think it can replace strength, Your Majesty, but it can transform it. These cubs, your children, are still learning who they are. They don't need to be taught fear. They need to be shown that there are other ways to be strong, ways that don't involve destruction. Sarith's amber eyes flashed with something unreadable. For the first time, Ara felt the weight of her words sink in. She had spoken not as a diplomat, but as a mother, one who understood the power of compassion and the immense responsibility of shaping young lives. You are speaking of things you don't understand, human. Sarith growled, her voice laced with a sharp edge. We have ruled for eons, built empires from blood and fear. The galaxy has bent to our will, and now you think kindness will be our salvation. Aura stepped forward, unfazed. I'm not asking for salvation. I'm asking for a chance to prove that there's more to life than just conquering. The queen took a step back, her talons scraping against the floor with a metallic screech. She didn't retreat in fear, but in thought. She had never known a creature like Ara, so small, so fragile, yet so unyielding in her convictions. And her words struck a chord. Deep within Sarith, a small part of her, the part that had birthed these cubs, the part that had known them before they were molded into weapons, began to question the very principles she had held sacred. The room was silent as the cubs continued to play, their instincts drawn to Aura as if she were their natural caretaker. Sarith's gaze softened slightly, though it was not an admission. Not yet. But for the first time in her life, the queen's certainty wavered. Could it be? Could there be something to Aura's way of thinking? Something that could help her people grow, evolve, without losing the strength they had worked so hard to build? Sarith let out a low, frustrated sigh. You ask for too much, she muttered, her voice softening just enough that only Ara could hear her. I ask for nothing, Ara replied calmly. I offer what I know and what I've seen work. Whether you take it or not is up to you. The queen stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her empire pressing down on her. The echoes of generations of conquest filled the room. She could feel her old instincts clawing at her, urging her to dismiss Ara, to force her back to her place. But something within the queen began to question whether it was time for a new way. And just like that, the galaxy's most feared predator, the matriarch of the Kirathi Empire, stood on the precipice of an unprecedented decision. The room remained frozen, every being in the chamber holding their breath as the queen's posture shifted. Sarith's talons flexed, not in aggression, but in contemplation. Her amber eyes flickered between Ara and the cubs, then back to the diplomats, who were anxiously watching the exchange. They, too, could feel the weight of the moment, the shift in the room, but none dared speak. Even the normally stoic Calvarians were silent, as though awaiting the queen's next move. Ara's calm presence stood in stark contrast to the brewing tension. She was still surrounded by the cubs, their chirps and movements echoing in the chamber, a sound that no one could ignore. She glanced up at Sarith, her voice steady but tinged with a hint of compassion. You've led your people to power, Your Majesty, but your cubs, your children, are the future of your species. You have a chance to change the course of that future, to shape them in a way that's never been done before. Sarith's eyes narrowed. And you think you can change us? You believe that by simply offering kindness, you can reprogram centuries of instinct, of dominance. I don't need to change you, Your Majesty, Aura replied, her voice calm but firm. I only want to offer an alternative. a choice. For a moment, Sarith said nothing. The weight of centuries of tradition, the burden of her people's legacy, seemed to press down on her. But then, as if snapping out of a trance, she stepped back, turning her gaze toward the other ambassadors in the room. "There is more at stake here than you know," Sarith said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a subtle menace. "This is not just about cubs or humans. There are forces at play, hidden agendas within the council." Ara's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Before Sarith could answer, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "I think we've heard enough," said Zedran, a Calvarian diplomat. His voice was cold, calculated. "The humans' program is a threat, not just to the Kirathi, but to the stability of the entire galactic order. We cannot afford such experiments." The room erupted into murmurs. Zedran's words were like a spark in a powder keg, igniting a new wave of uncertainty. Ara's eyes flicked to Zedran, then back to Sarith. The Calvarians, known for their meticulous planning and scheming, were clearly not on her side. But why? Sarith's gaze hardened, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. She didn't speak immediately, but instead, a quiet tension filled the air, as though a silent agreement had been made between the Calvarians and the Thraxians, who now stood beside them in solidarity. Ara's mind raced. "Is this what you came for, Sarith? To destroy everything we've built?" The Queen's voice was low and measured. "It's not as simple as you think, Ara. There are forces within the Council who seek to control the program. Forces who would use the cubs, use the idea of interspecies unity for their own gain." The weight of her words landed hard on Ara. She had known that the political landscape was fraught with dangers, but she hadn't realized the extent to which the galactic powers would go to control the future of the species she had worked so hard to understand. The hidden agenda wasn't just a personal matter for Sarith. It was a much larger, more dangerous game that was being played, one that threatened not only the cubs, but the fragile peace Ara had worked to create. Ara's mind was spinning. Who could she trust? What was the true cost of this program? Sarith, who had once been a symbol of ruthless power, now appeared to be something else, a pawn in a much larger, far more dangerous game. And the stakes, for the first time, felt much higher than just one human's survival. The revelation hung in the air like a dense fog, suffocating any possibility of immediate resolution. Ara's mind raced, piecing together the dangerous web that had begun to unravel before her. The cubs, the very creatures she had been sent to help, were now the pawns in a much larger game, one she hadn't anticipated. The implications were vast, and suddenly the stakes felt personal. Ara glanced down at Tira, the silver-marked cub, who had nestled into her side, still purring contentedly. The other cubs, too, had calmed, their sharp talons now retracted as they squirmed in Ara's lap. To them, this was just another moment of care, of reassurance. But for Ara, it was a quiet war zone. She could feel the weight of Sarith's words pressing down on her shoulders, and yet she couldn't allow herself to be distracted. These cubs needed her, and she couldn't afford to falter now, not when the program she had worked so hard for was on the verge of being destroyed. The other ambassadors shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking between Ara and the Queen. Ara knew their distrust of her was growing. There was too much uncertainty now, too many unknowns. Her methods were radical, yes, but they were working. The cubs were thriving under her care, and she couldn't let the political games of the council derail that progress, not when it was so fragile. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp voice. "You're naive, human," Zedran said, his tone dripping with disdain. "The Karathi are not like your species. They have no place for your kindness. They respect power. They always have, and always will." Aura stood abruptly, her posture straightening. She refused to let Zedran's words, or anyone else's, deter her. "Respect can come in many forms," she shot back. "What's truly dangerous isn't kindness. It's the belief that strength is only found in domination." She turned her gaze back to Sarith, who had yet to speak, her amber eyes flickering between Ara and the other ambassadors. "This isn't about human superiority. It's about understanding. It's about finding a way forward for all species. But if you're telling me that power is the only thing that matters here, then we've already lost." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarith's eyes were unreadable, her massive frame seemingly locked in a battle of its own. Ara's chest tightened. She knew she had to convince Sarith, but the cost of her conviction was beginning to weigh on her more than she had realized. She wasn't just fighting for the future of the cubs. She was fighting for a future where her people, her species, were no longer seen as insignificant. But even as the words left her lips, she could feel the growing isolation. The Calvarians, the Thraxians, they weren't just against her. They were against the idea that a human could reshape the galaxy in a way that didn't rely on power or fear. Ara swallowed the bitterness that threatened to rise in her throat. The cost of her ideals was becoming all too clear. But then, as her gaze met Sarith's, she saw a flicker of something new. Uncertainty, maybe even curiosity. Sarith was still the queen, immense and terrifying, but there was something else there now. A moment of vulnerability, a crack in the facade of strength she had built over millennia. The future, Ara realized, wasn't just about saving the cubs. It was about saving herself from becoming part of a system she could no longer accept. The tension in the room was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Aura could feel the weight of Sarith's gaze upon her, the quiet scrutiny, but she also felt the subtle pressure building from the other ambassadors. Zedran's cold eyes never left her, and even the normally composed Thraxians were beginning to show signs of agitation. The peaceful atmosphere that Ara had worked so hard to cultivate was now teetering on the edge of collapse. Her mind raced, trying to anticipate the next move in this game of galactic diplomacy. But then, something unexpected happened. A familiar voice, one she had once trusted, broke the silence. "Ara, I think we need to rethink this approach," said Dr. Malik, one of Ara's senior colleagues in the program. His voice was low, almost apologetic, but the look in his eyes was anything but. Ara turned to face him, the shock evident in her expression. "What do you mean, Malik?" she asked, her heart sinking as she tried to read the situation. Malik's gaze flickered between Ara and the room full of diplomats, but it was the way he avoided her eyes that struck her. "I think you've gone too far with this. This bond you're trying to create between your species and the Karathi cubs. It's..." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's not sustainable. We've made our point. Perhaps it's time to leave it behind." Ara's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice cold now. "Are you abandoning the program? Are you siding with them?" Malik's jaw tightened. "I'm not siding with anyone, Ara. I'm just looking at the bigger picture. You've become too idealistic. You don't see the consequences, the risks." We can't afford to lose our position within the council. Ara's mind spun. You're worried about the council? About politics? She spat. What about the Cubs? What about them, Malik? They're the ones we're supposed to be saving, not playing pawns in a galactic power struggle. For a moment, Malik seemed to soften, but then his expression hardened again. You're not seeing it clearly. There are factions within the council, forces that don't want this program to succeed, and you're giving them the ammunition they need. A human influencing the Karate. It's dangerous. They will never accept it, and you've made yourself a target. Aura felt the ground beneath her feet shift. Malik, the man she had trusted, had just turned his back on everything they had worked for. She realized then that his betrayal wasn't just political. It was personal. He was afraid of what would happen if Aura succeeded in changing the galaxy's balance, and afraid of the consequences that would come for anyone who dared to challenge the established order. Are you saying you're going to help sabotage the program? Ara's voice was trembling with both anger and disbelief. Malik didn't respond directly, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't just backing away. He was actively working against her. Ara's heart pounded as the full weight of the situation crashed down on her. This wasn't just about the program anymore. It was about her survival. And in the quiet hum of the chamber, with Queen Sarith still watching, Ara realized that her fight had just become a lot more dangerous. The betrayal hit harder than Ara expected. Her trust in Malik had been one of the few things that kept her grounded in the chaos of interspecies diplomacy. Now, as she stood before the council, feeling the weight of his words crashing down on her, she realized that this mission, this hope for change, was far more dangerous than she had imagined. As Malik walked away, casting a lingering glance over his shoulder, Ara felt a wave of isolation wash over her. Her mind raced, but her heart was clear. She could not let the program fall apart. Not now, not when she was so close. The Cubs needed her, and the universe needed the change she was trying to create. She wouldn't let it all be in vain because of one man's fear. Queen Sarith's low growl pierced the silence. You are brave, human, she said, her voice carrying a weight that only someone as powerful as the Karate Queen could. But you're also foolish. Ara stood her ground. I don't care if you think I'm foolish, Your Majesty. What matters is that this program works, and it will, whether you like it or not. The Queen tilted her head, watching Ara with an intensity that almost felt like a challenge. You think I fear you? Sarith's voice held an edge of quiet amusement. I don't fear your methods. I fear the change they bring. You are not just creating something new with these Cubs. You are undoing the very foundation of our strength. Ara met her gaze steadily. Strength built on fear is a brittle thing, Your Majesty. It cracks easily. Sarith's mandibles clicked sharply, a sound that would have made most beings flinch. But Ara remained unfazed. Her heart was steady. The room held its breath as the Queen took a step toward her. I've seen many challenges in my lifetime, Sarith began, her tone softer now, more reflective. Wars, rebellions, betrayals. But this, she glanced at her Cubs, who were still curled around Ara, comfortable and safe. This is something different. Ara could feel the shift in Sarith's energy. The Queen was no longer just the proud, unyielding leader of the Karate Empire. She was something else now, vulnerable, uncertain. And for the first time, Ara saw the possibility of change in her eyes. You are asking me to give up everything I know, Sarith said quietly, almost as if to herself. To turn away from everything that has made my species what it is. Ara stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. I'm not asking you to give up your strength. I'm asking you to see that there is more than one way to be strong. Your cubs are proof of that. They've trusted me because I've given them what they need most. Kindness, love, safety. These things don't weaken us. They make us stronger. Sarith's amber eyes flickered as she looked down at the cubs. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully, as if reconsidering the very foundation of her existence. Then, without warning, the queen knelt. Ara's heart skipped a beat as the massive form of Queen Sarith lowered itself to the ground, her imposing figure now at eye level with Ara. The act was one of reverence, but it also sent shockwaves through the room. This was the same queen who had raised planets, crushed civilizations, and built an empire through sheer force. And now she was kneeling before a human. I see what you have done, human, Sarith said, her voice low but filled with something akin to respect. Teach me what you have taught them. Ara stood still, the weight of the moment settling over her. The queen had just broken the centuries-old tradition of Kirathi dominance, and it was not out of defeat. It was a choice to change. Ara nodded slowly, a soft smile touching her lips. I will teach you, your majesty, but it will take time. Change always does. As Sarith rose to her full height, she looked at the ambassadors, and for the first time, her gaze did not carry the weight of threat. It was filled with uncertainty, but also with the flicker of something new. The possibility of a future where the galaxy's most feared predator could lead through compassion, not just fear. The room was silent as the truth began to settle in. Ara had won, not through force, not through threats, but through something more powerful. Humanity's greatest strength, kindness. The silence in the chamber stretched long after Queen Sarith's kneeling gesture. It was an uncomfortable silence, filled with unspoken questions and unprocessed emotions. Sarith had lowered herself before Ara, but it was clear that the queen was not yet fully committed to the path Ara had laid before her. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a response, for the shift that would make everything clear. Ara, though, was not ready to let her guard down. She had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The Kirathi Empire was not just a kingdom. It was an ideology, a way of life, rooted in power and fear. Queen Sarith's willingness to listen was a sign of change, but it was still fragile. Ara knew better than to think one conversation would change centuries of bloodshed and conquest. We must take immediate action. Zedran's voice broke the silence, cold and calculated. The Council will not tolerate any disruption to the established order. If we endorse this human method of juvenile development, it will send a message we cannot afford. Ara turned to face the Calvarian diplomat, her voice firm. You're not worried about the cubs. You're worried about losing control. This isn't about us anymore, Zedran. It's about the future of every species. This program isn't just about training young predators. It's about creating a future where we don't just conquer each other. It's about showing that empathy and connection can work in this galaxy. Zedran scoffed, his lip curling in disdain. You still don't understand, do you? The balance of power is delicate. The galaxy doesn't function on kindness. It functions on dominance. Ara's heart sank. She could see it in his eyes, the deep-rooted fear that the galaxy was built on a foundation of cruelty, and anything different would destroy that order. But she couldn't back down. She wouldn't. Then let the galaxy burn, Ara replied, her voice calm but resolute. If this is the price of change, then I will pay it. But as the words left her mouth, she realized the true cost of her mission. She wasn't just fighting for the cubs, or even for her own ideals. She was fighting for a future where humanity had a place in the galaxy. One that didn't rely on exploitation, on bloodshed. The price of that future, she knew, was something even more precious: her own survival. The ambassadors shifted nervously, exchanging uncertain glances. Zedran's words, once cold and unyielding, now seemed hollow in the face of Ara's unshakable conviction. But there was still a darkness in the air, a sense of impending danger that Ara couldn't ignore. Something was coming. The political tides were shifting, and not everyone would be as willing to embrace the changes she had brought about. Then, just as Ara began to feel a sense of uncertainty gnawing at her, Queen Sarith spoke once more, her voice low, but carrying an unmistakable weight. Your human idealism is dangerous, Ara, the Queen said, her tone no longer threatening, but thoughtful. But I have seen what your methods can do. Perhaps there is something to this after all. For a long moment, the chamber stood still. The possibility of change was no longer a mere dream. It was real. Ara could feel the eyes of the galaxy's most powerful species upon her. She had started something that could change everything, but the cost was yet to be fully realized. And with that realization came a harsh truth. Change, true change, always required sacrifice. Ara wasn't sure yet what that sacrifice would be, but she knew it was coming. The path ahead was uncertain, and the price of her conviction was rising higher with every passing moment. The chamber was still, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Ara stood at the center, surrounded by the cubs who, despite their wild nature, had shown her more trust than any of the galaxy's most feared warriors ever had. Queen Sarith, now standing tall once again, regarded her with a quiet intensity that seemed to have shifted in the span of a few hours, from a predator's calculating gaze to something resembling curiosity. Zedran, along with the other diplomats, had retreated to the edges of the room, whispering among themselves. They were no longer mocking Ara's methods, no longer dismissing her as a naive outsider. Something had changed. A new possibility was unfolding, one where the balance of power wasn't dictated by strength alone, but by something far more unpredictable and dangerous: compassion. Yet, even as Ara allowed herself a moment to breathe, she knew this victory was far from assured. The Council had not yet ruled on the multi-species juvenile development program, and the political battle was far from over. Sarith had agreed to endorse it for now, but there were still factions in the galaxy, powerful factions that would stop at nothing to tear it down. Queen Sarith stepped forward, her massive form casting a shadow over Ara as she regarded her with something akin to respect. The Queen's voice was solemn, yet laced with an undertone of something rare: vulnerability. You have changed something in me, Ara Voss, she said, her voice carrying the weight of eons of rule. Perhaps it is not just the cubs who need to learn. Perhaps I, too, need to understand this kindness. Ara's heart clenched as she looked up at the Queen. this was not a victory in the traditional sense. It was a beginning, a dangerous, uncertain beginning. Sarith had shown the first cracks in the centuries-old foundation of her empire, and for the first time, Ara realized that she was no longer fighting just for the cubs. She was fighting for a future where humanity could play a vital role in shaping the galaxy's future, not through dominance, but through understanding. Ara took a deep breath, her eyes still locked on the Queen. It's not about changing your species, Your Majesty. It's about finding a way forward, together. There is enough strength in the galaxy for all of us, as long as we learn how to use it without destroying each other. The Queen's gaze softened imperceptibly, but Ara caught it. A moment of recognition, of a shared understanding. It was a fragile connection, but one that felt like the start of something momentous. The political ramifications of their discussion were far from clear, but one thing was certain: a change was coming. In the weeks that followed, the political landscape shifted. The Karathi Empire, under Sarith's guidance, began to rethink its role in the galaxy. The program Ara had started was given a chance to grow, despite the lingering doubts and opposition from the more conservative factions. The cubs thrived under Ara's care, and word of their progress spread across the galaxy, challenging long-held beliefs about what it meant to be strong. Yet, as Ara stood before the council once more, ready to advocate for the program, a lingering doubt remained in her mind. The road ahead was filled with uncertainty. The galaxy was not an easy place to change, and there would be those who resisted every step of the way. But as she looked down at Tira, the silver-marked cub, now calm and steady under her care, Ara felt a surge of determination. The fight was far from over, but this moment, this first step, was proof that change was possible. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was all they needed to build something better. As Ara stood at the precipice of this new chapter, she couldn't help but wonder, what happens when humanity's greatest strength, kindness, becomes a force that can change the galaxy? The road ahead is uncertain, and the battle for the future has only just begun. What do you think? Will the galaxy embrace a new way, or will power and fear still dominate? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of human resilience and intergalactic change.